this story that we're going to look at is post-1840 and focuses on Tasmania. So that's why the map is there. We are looking at Zephaniah Williams, and I owned up here to say, look, at the moment I'm in the process of trying to write a book with another author, Sue Allen. The pair of us have been at this for quite a time. Some people think we've been at it too long, but the reason is we keep finding more. When we started, the difficulty was, what can you possibly say about Zephaniah in Tasmania? But that has grown over time, and the book we're writing isn't specifically going to be about Tasmania. It's called The World of Zephaniah and Joan Williams. So we're looking at a time span from the 1790s to the time of the Rising, 1839. That's the prime part of what we're looking at in the book. But in order to understand that, we also have to look at what happened to Zephaniah and to Joan and their family after that date, because Zephaniah died in 1874. So we're talking about a very long time span, and what we're going to look at tonight is produced very interesting material about Zephaniah in the post time that he was actually in the penitentiary area of the country. What has happened over the years is that we started looking at this book after I'd written a book called Render the Chartists. What do they call it? Render the Chartists defenseless, yes. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that, but it's about the voyage of the three Chartists from Newport area, from Monmouthshire, from who were, of course, John Frost, Zephaniah Williams, and William Jones. And they were sentenced to death by hanging, etc. I won't go into the nasty details of the treason, but think of Guy Fawkes. Some of those things were, except the disemboweling, that was actually had been removed from the statute in 1813. I mean, as late as that, disemboweling. So this was what had happened to a traitor, and these three men waited in Monmouth jail. There was no appeal system at the time, but there were certain technicalities that had to be addressed after the trial. There had been a clever ploy by the defence lawyers, and these issues had to be looked at. So there was a huge campaign in the country, which has been neglected until recent times, about returning these three men from where they were sent, and how it happened. There was a fortnight between their time of the 16th of January 1840, when they were sentenced to death, and 2nd of February, when it was announced by royal decree they were to be instead transported for life. And that is the most interesting period that I tried to deal with in that book, realizing subsequently that it's just scratching the surface. There's so much more to it. And you can only understand it if you go forward in time to the later period of Zephaniah's time not in mainland Australia, he never went there. It was all in Van Diemen's Land, which got a makeover by 1854, 55, 56, when it was now being called Tasmania, and these three men were given their pardons. So there's a 16-year period from the time they were transported, February 1840, to the time when they finally got their pardons. John Frost, as you probably know, returned, and that's another story. And the book dealt with that. And what we're now moving on to, what I started looking at in having written that book, was what happened to the other two, and particularly Zephaniah Williams. And it's amazing what is being turned up in recent times that's added to that. And to the much more, from the book's point of view, the earlier period as well, thanks to the digitalization of documents and information, the internet has made the whole thing come alive. And we now know far more about Zephaniah than we ever knew before. So we do answer a question, and there's a good question that could be asked, is why did that happen? Why was he forgotten? Because he seems to have been. He doesn't have the attention from historians of John Frost. There's all sorts of reasons for this, which we can talk about another time perhaps. But tonight we're going to listen to a travelogue. I insist it's a travelogue. Tries to sell it as his holiday slaps. It's not a holiday. You go there to Australia, that is, annually, don't you?
Yes.
Because for family. And in 2021, I think it was.
It was the end of COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, that was right.
It was.
Oh, even before it, was it?
It was the first flight out of Heathrow where I was allowed the
it
to go.
was in that period, yes.
Yeah.
I discovered that you were going, I went regularly, I didn't know this about you, and suddenly I discovered that and said, can you do this? Anyway, you're going to tell that story because it's so important. It's revealed a lot of very useful material that will appear, hopefully, in the near future. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Steve McGuire.
Yeah, I'm Steve. Les is quite right. This all started was I was going to Australia to stay with my daughter and the family, and I wanted to take something to read again, like you do. And I came into Newport and I wanted to buy this book by Dave Osman. And I couldn't find, they didn't have it anywhere in the bookshops in Newport. So I phoned 6 Points in Cardiff, said, how can I get a copy of this? And he said, well, if you're in Cardiff, pop in and see me, and you can have a copy. So I did, I went to see him, and very inquisitive, Les, where are you going? When are you going? How long are you going for? I was beginning to think I'd done something wrong. You know, I was pinned against the wall, these questions flying. But he said, that was when he said to me, will you be going to Tasmania while you're there? Because I'm going to Sydney. I'm going to Sydney for 3 months. I said, I will be going to Tasmania. There's a test match. There's an Ashes test on in Hobart. I'll be going over there. He said, oh, I was wondering if you could do something for me. And that's when he asked me, could I do some investigative work to find out, to confirm existing information that Les had, but to try and find out new information that he didn't have about Zephaniah Williams' time spent in that area there. It's the county of Devon in North Tasmania, and it was in a place called Latrobe, where he spent a great lot of time and in the surrounding areas. So I said I will. Next thing I know, I get emailed, loads of stuff comes through from reading. I know what I'm going to do. I've got to find a monument, I've got to find a Bible, I've got to find the house they lived in, and all this is there in my mind. So I thought, well, this is going to be fun. So I set off, and there's the man himself, looking very splendid. Latrobe is, you can't call it a one-horse town because that would be unfair. It's quite a nice town, but it's all single-storey buildings. You've got a single-storey building, the main street with 1 or 2 two-storey buildings. I had booked into a bed and breakfast called the Lucinda Bed and Breakfast, which is quite important in this story actually, and that's it there. I drove over, and it's one of the few two-storey houses that there are in Latrobe. And I booked in, and I found I was the only guest in this place. I was the only guest. And I booked in, and the lady in there was almost as inquisitive as Les. She started firing questions at me about why was I there, what was I doing. And I told her, I'm looking for a monument to Zephaniah Williams. I'm looking for a Bible that's held in a house. Well, it was last seen in the 1950s in a house in Latrobe. So it was getting on. I went up to bed, and I found that nobody lived in this house except during the day they come over and cook and clean and stuff. I was the only person in this place. I went up to bed, and there's that outside my bedroom. It's a stuffed cat. Right. So I'm in this house, just me and a stuffed cat. It was the weirdest sort of feeling. But anyway, the next day I came down to breakfast and she's there. She said, I found where I think that monument is. It's on the banks of the Mersey in an area of land known as Atkinson's Park. So I said, well, that sounds very interesting. I'll go down and see it. And she said, and as for the Bible, she said, did you know the name of the house it was in? I said, yeah, Frogmore House. She said, well, my accountant lives in Frogmore House. Leave it with me, I'll arrange you to go and see it. Mm-hmm. So that was great. Very first morning, this was all happening. So I went out and I went down to the Mersey, and this is what I found. This fine monument. It's on a man-made little peninsula out into that's the River Mersey, within Devon, and that's the River Mersey. It's really strange. Oh, by the way, I flew into Launceston when I was told off straight away and told to pronounce it properly. It's Launceston, they said. But I refused to say that. I was in Launceston. Right? So this is the monument that Les asked me to look out for. So I took loads of photographs of this thing, and these are the inscriptions on the four sides. Now the main one is Joan there, because this is known in La Trobe as Atkinson's Memorial, but it was obviously her monument, her gravestone, and these others were added later as they died. And it was obvious that this didn't originate here. It was obviously from somewhere else. But the interesting part about this is that in its position there on the Mersey's down below it as you're looking at it. If you draw a straight line across there to the other side of those trees is Frogmore House. So it was deliberately put up facing the house that Atkinson built. Frogmore House, but now you can't see either because of the vegetation that's grown up in between. So I was quite excited about this. I'd you know, on the first morning of doing what Les wanted me to do, I felt as though I'd come up with something solid. So right, let's get back a bit. I left there and I thought, right, I'm going to go into the town now, because the lady at the bed and breakfast said, why don't you go in the museum? You've got a lovely little museum, they'll help you. So I went into the town, went to the museum, and I was there on the only day of the week it closed. Right, so I couldn't get in. So I'm walking away and I saw a sign leaning against a wall. It said Family History Association, and an arrow and a drawing of a house. So I followed the arrow and I saw a building that looked like the building that was on the drawing, and I went up and knocked the door. A lady came and opened. No, she didn't. She slid a hatch thing across and she was talking to me through a hatch and asking me, could she help me? And I explained what I wanted, what I was there for. I was looking for information on Zephaniah Williams. So after a few COVID-related questions, she opened the door and let me in. And then I sat with them, they made me a coffee, I sat with them, and I told them what I was after. Well, her name was Ros, and she introduced me to the guy whose name was Ross. So they weren't related or anything, but it was Ros and Ross. And they suddenly set about seeing what they could find, and they supplied me with loads of information. While I was stood there, they supplied me with loads of information. Now, what we have here, maybe I should have stapled it together. That's one page, bear with me. Sorry about this, folks. Something like this always happens to me. They gave me, in a very short space of time. Copy of Zephaniah Williams' original criminal records sheet. Copy of his original entry into the country details. Copy of his register of death. An entry in the Hobart Mercury by the select committee to take appointed by the select committee to take analysis of a coal field in 1854. So they're using his knowledge. There was an extract from the Examiner in 1871 of opening the first public house in Don. It was called the Don Hotel. There was an extract from the Government Gazette showing him transferring ownership of the Don. And there was an article from Bush Life in Tasmania making reference to his start and eventual end to his mining operations in Tarleton. Tarleton is a little area just outside Latrobe. They furnished me with names and details of miners who were brought from the UK to work in his mines. And they gave me a copy of his purchase grant for land obtained in Sprayton, Tarleton in the county of Devon. So he actually bought an area of land. It was 500 acres of land and he paid £500 for it. And I was going to read the details of that, but it's too long. This is it. This is the deed that he had. Now this entitled him to mine on that land, search for coal on that land. And this is the area here, this in blue. Oh, sorry, as I was leaving, I left those people, Ros and Ross, and they texted me before I'd gone very far to say could I go back because they'd found something else interesting, and they had these for me. This is an original map showing his area of land, but they also did that for me, which overlaid it on a modern map. Now it's a bit difficult for you to read, it's a bit difficult for me to read, but I'll tell you now. Whoops. That's the River Mersey there, right? That is a place called Ballyhoo Creek, and that's an island there called Ballyhoo Island, right? Now, this is crisscross, this area is crisscross with, these are modern roads on there. And I thought, I got to come back here. I have to come back here because I'm going to have to really search these areas to see what I can find. So it was, the time was moving on, and I wanted to get to the next stop on my journey, which was trying to find the church where the monument had come from. And it actually came from Devonport. It was this church, the Anglican Church of Australia. It was originally called St. Paul's Anglican Church when they worshipped there. And they were actually buried in the grounds of this place. And in recent years, there's been lots of vandalism and bad behaviour, and they decided they wanted to clean up the area. So they did clean it up, and they sort of raised all the graves to the ground and turned it into a pleasant little park where people spent their lunches and things like that. But they saved 20 or so of the better gravestones and they erected them in an avenue. And I went and had a look at that avenue, and along it there was a gap. Sorry, I got a picture I didn't put on there of the avenue, and there's the gravestones, and then there's one gap, and in that gap is this, and it is obviously, as it says on the bottom, the original monument in memory of the above was transported to Latrobe in November 1987 and is now located in Atkinson's Park. So the monument that I showed you earlier had obviously come from here. Okay, by now it's changed its name, or it has been named Atkinson's Memorial in Atkinson's Park, Latrobe. So this is definitely the place where that monument came from. The next day I went back to the museum. In the museum, it's a very small museum, I asked the lady, I had heard, probably through Les, I'm not sure, that there was a cup that Zephaniah had been awarded for his services to the area, what he'd done to the area. So I asked the question when I'm in there, do you know anything about the cup? And they said, yes, we've got it here, come and have a look. So they took me to see it, and I said, oh, can I photograph it? They said, yes, but don't take it out of the case. So I photographed it in a glass case, but this was hanging on the wall, quite near it. And can you all read that, or do you want me to read it to you? I can read it out to you if you want. Zephaniah Williams was born at Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, where he worked as a coal miner from an early age. In his youth, he became involved in Chartist activities, electoral reform, and led an armed force of 3,000, mainly coal miners, in an abortive attempt on the Westgate Hotel, Newport, Monmouthshire, in 1839. For this, he was sentenced to death for high treason, but was later transported to Van Diemen's Land instead. He became overseer of the Saltwater River coal mines in 1845. Granted a ticket of leave in 1849, he prospected for gold at Newtown, Hobart, and in 1852 came to the Mersey coalfields, where he established successful mines and developed the township of Tarleton. His wife Joan joined him in 1854, and he was granted a full pardon by the governor in 1857. This is the interesting bit now. That Zephaniah Williams was held in very high regard by local settlers is attested by the silver cup below. This was about it, which was presented him from a grateful community. Made in England, it has a hallmark dated 1853. It then says his tombstone can be seen at St Paul's Church of England, East Devonport. It also commemorates his wife Joan, daughter Rhoda, his son-in-law George Atkinson, and his brother-in-law Llewellyn Llewellyn. So he was a much respected man, but they felt they need to award him this cup for the work he did there. So how he's moved on. It's right. Sorry about that. Moving on a bit quick. When I'd finished here, I'm not sure whether it was that afternoon or later on. I decided I'm going to do what I said earlier. This was the following morning. I'm going to crisscross the land on the map just to see what I can find, what I can come up with. Any evidence of coal works. These are the first things. These signs, Coal Hill Road and Coal Mine Road. So I guess I'm in the right area, right? But on Coal Mine Road and on Coal Hill Road, I found nothing. I couldn't find anything to do with coal mines, nothing at all. There wasn't the slightest thing. So I decided to drive down a road called Jowett Lane. Stick in my mind that, Jowett Lane. It was on the map, it was a dead end, it's a narrow lane, so I drove down it, and as I'm driving down, there's a few farmsteads on my right hand side, nothing on the left, except trees and fields and I got to the end and it was a dead end. So I'm turning my car around and I notice a chap leaning on a gate watching me. I'm suspicious. An unknown guy going down this dead end lane. And so I got out of the car and talked to him and assured him I was pretty harmless. And I then told him why I was there. He said, oh, coal mines, you're looking for coal mines? I said, I'm looking for evidence of. He said, go next door and ask Joan. I said, pardon? He said, go and ask Joan next door. She's got one in her garden. I said, she's got a coal mine in her garden. So I went next door, another farmstead, small farmstead. I drove down, walked from my car to the house, knocked the door, thinking, oh, and this lovely lady, Joan Davis her name was, she came out. And I spoke to her and I told her Mick, this guy's name was. I said, I've been talking to Mick next door and he suggested I come and talk to you. As soon as I mentioned Mick's name, she was very amenable. And I told her what I was there for. She said, no, that's strange. My husband told me, my late husband told me, that down the bottom of Field A, into Field B, there's some eucalyptus trees. And apparently he was down there and he found a vertical shaft in the ground. And he said, when he looked in further, he found horizontal shafts coming off it, heading towards our house, but our house is on the top of the hill, so it was coming under. He said, but he didn't go any further, he never checked any further, but you can go down and have a look if you want. So I thanked her, and she said, wait a minute, I'll turn the electric fence off and you can take your car down. Wow. So she turned the electric fence off and she opened the gate and she said, right, you just drive to the end of this field, which went down the hill, and then the very next field, the other side of the fence, you'll see the eucalyptus trees. I didn't like to tell her I didn't know what a eucalyptus tree looked like at that time, but I went. And this field was full of the most beautiful Palomino horses. So they were breeding Palomino horses on there. And it was a little bit surreal driving my car through these, down a field, looking for a coal mine. It's all weird. But when I got there, it was worth it, because this is it. This is a vertical shaft. It's full of coal black water because of the heavy rain they'd had in the preceding weeks. So I was unable to see any horizontal shafts. I keep meaning to go back and see it in better weather to see, but I don't know when I'll be able to do that. But this is still there on that land. There's electric fence around it so the horses don't get into it, and it's pretty good evidence of one of Zephaniah Williams' coal mines. It has to be. It's on the land he owned, land he bought for £500, and the description from her husband would indicate these horizontal shafts as well coming off it. So I was well pleased with finding that. So and these, by the way, are the eucalyptus trees. So that's what they look like. I didn't see a koala bear in them though. So then I finished off here. I went back up to the house, thanked her very, very much, and I set off because I believe I was then going to Frogmore House. Frogmore House, the house built by George Atkinson, who was, I haven't explained who George Atkinson was.
No, we haven't yet, no.
No, he's married to Rhoda, Zephaniah and Joan's daughter Rhoda, and his father, I believe his father was first of all involved with Zephaniah, and then the son through the marriage.
Ex-con.
Yeah, oh yeah, another ex-con, yeah. And then the son then married the daughter, and the whole family sort of came together. And George Atkinson was a real businessman. George Atkinson Jr. was a real businessman. And oh, sorry, before I went, I decided I left Joan's place. Now I'm going elsewhere now. I'm going to go find another lane to go down and have a walk around, which I did, and I found evidence of this old tram road. This was leading from up near Joan's mine, leading down towards the River Mersey. It hit a main road and stopped, and the other side of the road it carried on for a little while and then ended at this. This is, I believe, this is where Zephaniah's jetty was on the River Mersey, just near Ballyhook Creek. There's a better example of this in The Man from the Alamo. He's actually got the ruins of the jetty in there, but they're not evident now. So I think what we've got here, we've got the coal mine, we've got the tram road, leading to the jetty, onto the river, carted all the way. And I felt really good this day, discovering all this. I really did. So I left there, and I went to Frogmore House. Now, the lady who lives here, her name is Davis, Kerry Davis, and her mother's from Cardiff, and she was quite amenable to me when I got there, very pleasant. Her husband, the accountant, was in work, but her and her daughter invited me in and made me most welcome. And first of all, I said I'd like to take some photographs of the outside of the house. So I took loads of photographs. But it's interesting, this was built in 1892, but there had been previous houses on the site. And George Atkinson had built it with that tower there Zephaniah's son-in-law's, George. He built it so he could stand up there on that tower and watch his ships coming up and down the Mersey, carrying his timber out and coming back empty and then carrying more timber out. And so that's what he built that for. And it looks wonderful, doesn't it? It looks absolutely wonderful, this house. Inside it's an absolute ruin. I mean, I don't know how anyone could live in such, well, I wouldn't say squalor, but I think that's what I mean. But the lady then, so nice, so nice. Let me have a look at this, Brown's Bible. Now this is held together by blue tape on one corner. I need to do something with this. I hate seeing damaged books, I really do, and this gripes me. But I did advise her to get it seen before I left, but anyway, I don't know whether she did or not, I don't know. But I opened it and inside there's this. And it says, Joan Williams, her book, August the 22nd, 1834, Machen. So I think there's no doubt, well, in my mind there's no doubt, but I believe there's other thoughts now. But I believe this was taken with Joan when she went over, when in 1850 something.
It's one possibility.
Yeah, that's what I think. But they've got other ideas, right? So I mean, this proves it's her book.
Oh yes.
This
yes.
was her book, and inside the book, there's this. I won't read them to you. I've got them down here. This is the details of all her children, when they were born and when they died. Some of them only lived 6 weeks. And then there's some of them who didn't die, so they lived on. There's 2 Rhodas on there. One died earlier, but the one down the bottom, she lived on to marry George Atkinson. So, and this is all in the same hand. So I like to think that's Joan Williams' hand there, recording her children on there. Then on the other side, there's another entry in totally different hand, looks more recent at all, trying to give details of the Williams family.
It's written in biro, I think.
Yes, yeah, it's in biro, so it's a very, very recent. But that was all I could find in the book. There's some pencil notes. In there, there's pencil notes.
Yes.
And it's and there. And
They're a puzzle, but
yeah,
I think we have some suggestions.
It looks like dates. They're working out dates between children and so forth. They're on there in pencil.
Yeah.
So somebody has done that since Joan wrote
Yeah.
everything on there. Yeah. So oh, sorry. Let's put that away. I left there, and again I think I've done well here. Quite pleased with myself. Yes, so bless is pleased when I get home. So I went back to the house and I had to leave then. I was going to Hobart to the test match. I had 2 tickets for the test match, the Ashes, and I wish I hadn't. They got stuffed. We lost in 4 days, and I'd have done better to stay up here. But I flew back from Hobart to Sydney, back to the family, thinking, I need to go back. I've missed something. I want to do a little bit more. And the kids were off school then, so I decided to take my 2 grandkids with me. So that's what happened there. They haven't half grown in 2 years. Good God. But yeah, so we went back, and bless them, they were okay. They were well behaved while I was doing what I wanted to do. And then I decided I'd just look in the town, and every 2-story building I came across in the town was built by George Atkinson. Mm-hmm. He really was a businessman. I mean, he owned lots of businesses, and he built these buildings. This is one street in running through the middle of La Trobe, and all the rest of the buildings are single-story buildings, which we're down there. If you're ever in that area, it's worth just stopping and have a look at this town. It is quite interesting, and it's great down by the Mersey. And then after that, I thought one last thing I must do. I got to find the location of the Don Hotel. That is actually it. That's a photograph of the Don Hotel, built and owned by Zephaniah Williams in near the Don in Devonport.
What date was that? About 1860 or 65? He died in 1874.
What did I say? There was an entry, wasn't there?
Not to worry, no, we'll sort that out again.
It was built in 1869.
Oh, 69 is later,
Yeah.
right, okay.
The Don Hotel on the Don Bridge built
Hmm.
for Zephyr was in 1869. So that's that. So there's a story going around that this was up on the hill. That's the position it was in, and it's a sloping hill that goes down to the river, and that's called the Old Coastal Road. But it was at that time it was a tramway. It was a tramway down to the river, and down on the way down the hill there was white cottages dotted around. And the story is every evening the housewives would cook the evening meal, and then they'd come out on the doorstep in their pinnies with their arms folded, staring up at the dawn, daring their husbands to stay any longer because the dinner was on the table. But yeah, so he only had it for about 2 years, then he got rid of it. But there's a little map there, but you can't really see it of where it is relates to the river. But I was struggling to find it, and I saw a guy up a ladder painting outside of his house. So I thought, oh, I'll go and ask him. He was so relieved that somebody had stopped him. And he came down with pleasure, he said, and he came down, when I asked him a question, he came down the ladder, he shouted inside, 2 cups of tea! And his wife brought out 2 cups of tea, and we sat and talked. I told him I was looking for this. And he directed me to this area. He said, that's it. When that was knocked down, there was a smaller inn built on the place, on the site, and then that was eventually knocked down, and it's now just a private residence. And I bet the people in that house do not know what was there all that time ago, but that was it. And but then unfortunately this is where my story ends, because I decided I had to take the kids to places to see. They were on holiday, so I stopped here, and unfortunately I haven't been back since. But Les, I hope you've been able to use some of the stuff.
This has added enormously to our knowledge of what happened there. And looking, it creates ideas about what the family was like, and so it feeds back to the earlier times of the family. It does.
What amazed me was the high regard. I didn't expect a convict from South Wales to be held in such regard as he was obviously held in this town of Latrobe.
I think what it tells us, he's quite a charismatic individual. And because when he first was called up there, he was mining near Hobart, wasn't it?
Yes, he was.
This is after his freedom.
Yeah.
And so he's a free miner now, but he's still an ex-convict. So he had that stigma. They needed his expertise, it seems to me, because a company was set up in this area, and they invited him up to use his expertise. And then as soon as he'd been there, they said, go back, we don't need you. And they immediately rushed off, as it's written up in, actually that story is written up in Humphrey's book, The Man from the Alamo, which is a misleading title, very diffident about the title. I mean, I'll talk about this later, but or shall we talk about that just quickly now? Because you were piggybacking to some extent on him.
Yes.
But I mean, Latrobe, we knew that's where there was this Bible because it's mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the photographs that you had.
No. The interesting thing about that Bible is it has remained with the house. New owners of the house own the Bible. It's really strange. It didn't go with the Williams. It stays with the house. So when this Kerry Davis and her husband, they sell the house, they said the Bible will stay here. We will not be taking it with us. And if we sell the house. So it's a strange one.
You've extended the information that we've got about the Bible enormously, because we'll talk about that perhaps in a minute.
Even though we don't agree on something.
What do you mean we don't? It's only a small matter. The difference is that did she take it with her in 1854 when she went out with her daughter Rhoda and her brother Edmund to join Zephaniah?
Well, I think, of course, she did.
Well, it's a big book. How big is it?
Oh, it's a big, heavy book. It's, if you look at the top of that, that's about the dimensions of the Bible, and that thick.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's a heavy book.
I mean,
But Kerry Davis handed it to me quite easily, didn't he?
oh yeah, no, it's not the weight. It's just, she would have been restricted on. But I think you're right. If she took it with her, then it proves how important it was to her to take it. And there is another possibility that it came out later
With,
with her son.
who didn't stay long, did he?
He stayed a year, and he travelled. This is Llewellyn. Sadly, they had 6 children. Right, you've discovered that from the Bible. But as I think you said, there were 2 Rhodas and there were 2 Thomases.
That's right.
And of the 6 children, 2 had died by 1834 when the Bible was put together.
Yeah, that's right.
There are 3 children mentioned as surviving, though. There's 3 children that died. Yeah, in the 1820s. Now we can confirm that because we had the knowledge before you went out about these children from another marvellous find, quite accidental. It was something found in Abergavenny Market, a lost document on a stall there, and was fortunately picked up, bought, and brought to the Gwent Archives by somebody who recognised it was important because of the names that were in it. Amongst the many names of this parish, no, it wasn't a parish register, sorry, of this Baptist dissenting church at Argoed, set up in 1819, Argoed Chapel, still there, the building. And what we discovered was that during work that went on there, these disappeared. This document disappeared, or rather, not these, it was a single book. It's not a baptism book, it's because Baptists vary, but consistently at this time many of them would have not actually baptised babies. Some did, some didn't. They were divided over that issue, whether they christened or not. But one thing they were interested in doing was creating a register of births. So it's the birth date we get of those children there, and they correspond with the Bible. So that is very, very helpful. But we had that information already thanks to that find. But it's always good in history to have corroborating evidence. What is the puzzle is that these markings that are in the book, calculating, and we've spent a lot of time on that. By we, I'm talking about other people helping with the book writing. There's people like Sarah Richards and obviously Sue Allen, who was working with me on the writing, but also other people. And we've all looked at it, and Sarah in particular is very strong on this kind of genealogy. Well, our views are that they're calculating, as you said, the length of years left on a mortgage or on a lease.
Right.
Machen is the clue. It's obviously something that was drawn up round about 1834, with the date that's in the Bible.
Yeah.
She's acquired this in that period, and there's a sort of genealogy in the book. And then later, somebody has been calculating against another document which we do not have. And so we have to speculate about it. But what I can tell you is in 1834, that house that they were living in was up for say they had to release that lease on it. They didn't own it. It went back to the Clanart estate. I haven't been able to find any documentation in the Clanart estate documents yet. Who knows what might turn up one day. But we haven't got anything to help us with that. But what it does say is, look, what we do know about Zephaniah Williams at the time is he was bankrupt. 1831, after that, he's in trouble, as so many people were in the mining industry, and there's negotiations going on. So it could be that those dates are synonymous with 1834. Therefore, if that's the case, then you're right, she could have taken it with her. But there is another possibility that it was taken up by their son Llewellyn, who is one of the names in the Bible.
He wouldn't have had room in his case, he took his harp with him.
Yeah, I know, that's true. He did, because he thought he was going to stay. He's a harpist, very, very good harpist, very well known, became very renowned after coming back from Australia. His father seemed to think, he wrote to him saying you would make a great career here, but it just didn't fit, I don't think, to the colonial lifestyle. They're probably more interested in Irish music than Welsh, I don't know, but playing the harp didn't seem to go down too well. He didn't like the climate, and he became very ill in Adelaide. He went to mainland, because that was the idea that Zephaniah had, that he wouldn't stay in necessarily in Tasmania, but would go to the mainland where he really might make he was a great musician, and sadly died at age 49. But whilst he was out there, we've discovered all this quite recent times. I mean, his wife, his father owned, well, let's avoid using that word, had a lease probably. Nobody owned it much at all when you think about it. The ownership always lay with somebody much richer and more powerful. They would have his father-in-law kept a pub, and her brother was older than her, died while they were out in Australia, and that seems to be the main reason ultimately why they came back. They decided that he had a better chance to. Now certainly he could take over the pub, and did, the Rolling Mill in Blaenau, and that was his base for the career he had in travelling around. The inns were always the places where you put on a gig. So you know, that's what he spent the rest of his short life. Because as I say, I can't remember how old he would have been in 1857, I think, when he was there. I'd have to check that. Hold on, 22. 1822 he was born. Oh, yeah. So, a mathematics, please, to...
35.
35, yeah. So, it wasn't long much later that he died, yeah. But he had a good career. I mean, he was well known, and there are all sorts of stories told about him, but he was a great champion of his father. But as I say, Zephaniah gets forgotten, doesn't he? And of course, there are all sorts of... It's only in modern times that this idea that he succeeded in Tasmania has come forward. I mean, it's been around for a fair time, but by modern times, I mean from 1970s onwards, really. Yes, because before that, he was a bit of a failure, and yet again he failed. But he had ups and downs. Mining is that kind of, at this time particularly. You could open a mine and then suddenly, particularly in South Wales, that happened. You found the strata changed because of the faulting. But the sort of mines that they were opening in Australia were small ones as well. As what you mustn't imagine they had great sized collieries either. These were adits going into the hillside. They may go a long way. By the 1840s, they certainly were going a long way, crossing the valleys actually in some cases. But they were modest mines compared with the deep mines that come later in the 19th century.
Could I just ask a question, actually? You talked about the stigma, being an ex-convict.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't
in
finish
Van
that.
Diemen's land. But what would the population of Van Diemen's Land been then? I mean, surely ex-cons were probably quite common in that.
They were common, but what do you get?
I've no idea, but all I would say is there was a large force of what's the word I'm looking for? The security. But there was a large force of security operatives, whether it's the army or the police or whatever, who were not convicts. But there weren't. I don't suppose there were many ordinary people, except housewives, that would have been taken over there. But you wouldn't walk down the street and find a street full of normal people who grew up there, because it wouldn't have happened then, would it? It was much later.
Yeah, but there were. It was. We overlook the attitude. I mean, I think you're right in Tasmania compared, say, with New South Wales. The reason why it stopped in New South Wales was antipathy towards convicts. People who had were piling into Adelaide, for example. Many Chartists came out. It's interesting. The Chartism created a lot of people who emigrated because they gave up living here. But they were not very keen on convicts being on their doorstep. And don't forget the ones that went to Tasmania, and they were trying to change the place, give it a respectable sort of. There was an there was a very strong feeling amongst the migrants who were free settlers against the whole convict business, and antipathy towards it. So certainly these people who went there for mining purposes were not. They might use convict labour, but they didn't want somebody to be actually involved in the running of it. That's the difference, I think. Yes, class differences. Yeah.
Les, Steve showed a prison record of Zephaniah. I was wondering, it made me. Did you show me some writing about prison?
There is a prison document in amongst that lot, and we have got copies of it. I haven't got it with me now, but if you want it, I can.
No, I was wondering. We had the talk on conviction politics, which is recorded digitally all the 500,000 or whatever, 150,000 convicts data. Is Zephaniah's included in that?
Oh yes.
Yes.
That's how if you remember, he picked on some of the stuff that's been included in that website about Zephaniah. Sadly, they get things wrong about what happened here. That's my feeling. Obviously they have the documents. And he was well documented, as Nick explained, highly detailed. So we have all that, and that's been available now for a long time, thanks to Trove, which is an Australian source, very of importance, run by the Australian National Library, online. So you can get into a lot of that stuff quite easily, if you just look it up. So yes. We've got a complete copy of the document. So you can trace what he did in that documentation between 1840 to 1854. And then they had a system of giving him a ticket of leave, which meant you didn't have to stay in the penitentiary area around Port Arthur. You were given a ticket of leave to go out and work in the general community. So there were plenty of people who went there who were interested in taking land. They went to farm. And it's interesting how many people are still there farming in that way. Modest-sized farms. So there was work to be had, and they wanted convict labour. They did, but it's a class system, and there's a growing antipathy amongst business people about the whole thing of convicts. But you don't really want ex-convicts necessarily to be in your business. That's where people like William Jones and Zephaniah could score with lots of people because they weren't considered to be the normal convict. But the numbers are argued about. I mean, how many did you say the total number of?
150,000, I think there were 5,000 political.
Yes, that's the point. They are a modest proportion of the total, but as that project keeps emphasising, that political thing is a fairly narrow definition, isn't it? People are obviously charged, like the Frost was and Zephaniah Williams, they're charged politically. Most of the people, even people who clearly were political, from the Birmingham riots, for example, were sent there as felons. You know, they weren't sent there and had no. Well, I'm not sure that it benefited you in 1840 to be a political prisoner. It did later on. The Irish who were sent at a much better time. They were treated very differently, the Irish Fenians, to the way Zephaniah Williams was. And I think this is something that comes out the more you study it, how hard a time he had. Now, if you want to find out about that, there are letters that he sent to Joan, which were published in 1877 by the South Wales Daily News. And we haven't got her letters, so it's a one-way track. But some of those letters tell us a great deal about what happened to him.
I presume that database will be able to separate people out into professions then, occupations here, you know, like lawyers and...
There were quite a number of middle class people who went for fraud. But then, do you want a business person like that to be running your business? You know, this is can you trust them? I mean, I'm trying to think of his name now. That's William Foster, William the Geach.
Yeah.
David Mills has done an enormous amount. Must get David to come here and talk about him sometime. I think that would be useful. Yes, that's a good idea because there's an interesting trap there. I mean, he couldn't leave fraud alone even when he came out in Australia.
It's funny. Earlier I was trying to show I've forgotten your name. Ian. I showed him the interactive John Frost. So I asked him a question I could think of. And I said, could you tell us about your relationship with Geach, right? And the answer was on there. He said, I'm not sure of this Geach that you referred to.
For those who don't know, Geach was the stepson of John Frost. Frost's wife, Mary, had previous, she was a widow when he married her, a wealthy widow, it's got to be said. So yes, William Geach became a lawyer, and yes, I'm afraid lawyers were prone to entering into all sorts of deals.
No change there.
Les, do you think that Zephaniah is forgotten for several reasons, really?
Yes, there's several,
In
yeah.
comparison with Frost, because first of all, Frost came back and Zephaniah didn't.
That's right.
And secondly, Frost continued to be politically active
Yes.
and campaigned for prison reform, certainly.
Yes.
And as you outline in Render the Chartist Defence, as he toured Britain when he came back, he was still in favour of reform, very vocal about being in favour of reform. Zephaniah doesn't seem to have been involved in any political activity in Australia, and again that's a contrast with William Cuffey, who stayed in Australia and was quite heavily involved in, I think, the trade union movement in Australia and became an elected politician at some point. James Stephens from Chepstow, who
Yes. Yeah.
another Chartist who went
Not very well in
Australia,
trade union.
became involved in the 8-hour day campaign in Australia. So there's this thing with Zephaniah that he was involved with politics for a relatively short period in comparison to some of these other people. So maybe that's why. I mean,
Except that
William
we are
Jones-
finding out that possibly the politics depends on how you define politics.
Yeah.
It goes back much longer than people previously thought in what we're writing with the book.
But it stopped when he went to Tasmania, really, didn't it?
It does. Oh yes. Well, did it? Because when he's out there, one of the people he escapes with, the second escape, I think it is. I've forgotten his name for the moment, but he was a Chartist. So I mean, and there seems to still have been an element of that rebel thing about him in that period, but I think he had the stuffing knocked out of him. The way he was treated. Frost had an easy time. I'm not saying it's easy to sit in a place. I mean, he was horrified by what he saw, the way the prisoners were treated. But he was in the office for a year, and even after when they decided on a get tough policy, political change here, because that's one of the things I tried to write about in 2015 was what was happening in there, and what was happening here. And I think that needs to be, in the future, somebody perhaps needs to take that and develop it. Whether I'll live long enough to do that, I would like to see somebody do it, because it needs to be done, because the two things are in tandem. I think your point is right about Frost. I mean, Zephaniah, but I think it's to do as much with the fear. They, in a way, I don't know that they were that afraid of Frost, the authorities. But they found him a stubborn man, and they were fooled, I think, into realizing. And when he came back, they didn't know quite how to deal with him, did they? I think you're right. But they thought he was going to be easy, let him back in because he's just an old man now. And at first that didn't work, but they seemed to corner him after a while. Managed to debunk him in some way, in many ways. Make him look meaningless because of his age, largely. I think that's how it happened. But then again, he fooled them by living to 93, 4, didn't he? Nearly 4, 94. But in the case of Zephaniah, didn't quite live that long, but he was a younger man, and had this chance in Australia. I don't think he could possibly come back and settle in Britain. He would have found it impossible because the authorities had marked him. There's no doubt about it. If you look at the letter he wrote, and under some pressure, one suspects, on board the ship, the letter that reveals interesting elements confirming that there were plots, there was a plot, let alone plots, to have some kind of rising. So he was a marked man, because if you look at the document as it was handed over from the Colonial Office in London to the Home Office, the Under Secretary, whose name escapes me at the moment, wrote on it to the effect, this man needs to be further. I mean, he knows a lot more. We can squeeze him, and I think that's what they did do to him. They tried to break him. So you're looking at an individual who, yes, he doesn't do anything political, but in his way, as I think what you've shown tonight, he personally survived it and showed, look, I am a winner. And that's what he was out to do. I think he was, who knows what goes on inside the head of a person. And what he'd wanted before in society was esteem, respect. He didn't get it because of his ideas. And his ideas, well, are they political? Yes. Politics is... the only thing he ever wrote was actually attacking predestination. This is a theological argument. He's well read in the Bible, although he's a free thinker, and in fact, at best a Unitarian, but seems to be a complete totally free thinking about religion, but he's surrounded. He understands you cannot do what he wants to do in society when people are covered with this Calvinistic notion of predestination, where God decides what you do, not you. He's a rationalist. He's from the 18th century rethinking that's gone on, but he's left behind by a new surge of Methodism of a kind with, it's Calvinistic, not like Wesleyanism. There's no freedom of decision making, and for him, that's the most important thing: liberty. So I think when we talk about the Chartists in general, you've got to get away from seeing that they're really involved in the kind of politics of their own day, let alone what we call politics. It was to do, I think, in the coalfield with a kind of repression that was existing of its class oppression. He's not in the working class. Isn't there such a thing at the time that it's developing, but amongst the miners, but he's caught between that and the class that he thinks he belongs to, or did. They weren't landowners. They weren't in the landowning class, but they were the Gwerin. They were the people who had who felt that they had a say in the running of that society, but they didn't. The society that they're in, they have no political power whatsoever, do they? The magistrates decide. The magistrates belong to the landed class, which runs Parliament in London. It's as different as that. And ordinary folk like Zephaniah are told you don't take part in this. Frost the same,
Yes, thank you very much, both of you. So who are the landed class? We said along the way, everyone's only a leaseholder.
No, not everyone.
No, not everyone. So who's the everyone who isn't a leaseholder?
But 1%, I suppose.
Because they name something the River Mersey, and they have an area called Tarleton, which is another reference to Liverpool, and it's very unpleasant. Long-term slave-owning MP, Bannister Tarleton. So who's at the top?
You mean here or there?
In Tasmania.
Oh, Tasmania.
Tasmania.
You're not asking the right person, I'm
He
afraid.
obviously does find a place where he can do what he does, work mines, have a hotel, and all the rest of it, build the only two-storey buildings in his local world. So how does he come to terms with that world over the decades that he's there? Having come through the extremes of what the British police state can do to him to get into it, he's now there and he's working reasonably successfully there. Possibly as he would have wished he could have done back in the 1830s in the valleys before going through the political moment that took him through the police state and into this new world that he's built for himself, with his family Bible, in this new place. So, how does he get there? And who are the Tarleton, Mersey landowning people who make it possible for him to live there and to work on their bits of coal mine?
It's an interesting area to explore. Any thoughts?
It's the Crown. That was the Crown that he bought the land from.
Yes, Crown owns all the land.
The Crown. In fact, there was a big land grab up there at the time. He had a small area. The others around him, much larger areas, but they were all bought from the Crown.
And Tasmania is one of the key examples of genuine genocide in colonialism. The population that originally owned the land were wiped out. So in that case, it was terra nulla as regards land ownership, and it probably, as you say, the Crown probably did own it, and then favoured people would have gained from that, and maybe bought the land or owned the land as a result of it. But it would not have had as fixed a class structure as that which existed in Britain at the time. because of its, the nature of things. It's, I mean, you could identify the 1% in Wales quite easily along the land, but
Yes, yeah.
Or less than 1%.
Yes, it was, you're right there, it wasn't impossible, wasn't, yeah. I mean, theoretically, I suppose all land belongs to the Crown now, isn't it? I don't know.
Yes. I was just looking for the...
Ultimately, thanks to the Normans. I don't know.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for coming. As I say, have you checked on the date for the next